Recording in progress.
We lost you. You got muted. We can't hear anything. Let's unmute again. Okay, start over, please. We didn't hear anything.
Okay. This week's Sedra is Parsha Shoftim. In Parsha Shoftim, the Torah talks about the appointing, well, many things, appointing of a melech, appointing of judges, and appointing a Mashuach Milchama. Who is the Mashuach Milchama? The Mashuach Milchama was a person a Kohen, who was appointed to accompany the Jewish people when they went to war, and he would first of all give them words of encouragement, and he would actually mention in certain wars people that were exempt from participating in the war. For example, a person who planted a vineyard and was not yet able to take of its fruit, a person who built a house and in a sense did not yet move in and live in that house. Yerushalmi says we're talking about the vineyard in Eretz Yisrael. We're talking about a house in Eretz Yisrael because it has to be a chil shel mitzvah. It has to be a house of mitzvah. When you build a house in Eretz Yisrael, it's a house of mitzvah. Building a house in Chutz La'aretz, of course, everybody needs a house to live in, but it's not identified as a house of a mitzvah. Matter of fact, there are shitos that say that when you make the sudas mitzvah, when you have a new house, so some say that it's only a house in Eretz Yisrael, because a house in Eretz Yisrael, when you dedicate a new house in Eretz Yisrael, that's a sudas mitzvah. Whether if the house is associated with other mitzvahs, so perhaps you could say the same svara, but Yerushalmi mentions only Eretz Yisrael. So he would mention some of the reasons that people would be exempt from fighting in the war. So someone, let's say, who built a house and did not yet move into the house, or planted a vineyard and was not able yet to take of its fruit, didn't have the necessary time. So he's exempt from war, although he has to participate in the war effort, even though it's not in the actual battle itself. He has to help prepare food, things that are necessary for the war effort. So Torah tells us, and the Kohen Mashuach Milchama would have to give words of encouragement to tell the Jews not to be scared, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God will help them, and even if the enemy seems to be more than they are, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God goes with them. And expressive of that was the fact that the Aron, the ark, which had the Aseres Hadibros, would go with them. And in a sense, we find there are halachas, laws of tznius, of modesty, that applied. Many of these laws apply everywhere, but the Torah mentions it specifically in regard to war. because we know when people go to war, things that are assumed to be a proper way of conduct somehow fall apart. And people do all kinds of things during war. And it's the one place that the Torah says, Dibra Torah Keneged Yetzer Hara. The Torah tells us that sometimes limitations that people understand rationally that they should have, when they get to war, they don't understand. Or passion overtakes them. It's remarkable that when you take a look, where everybody knows of the atrocities of murder that took place in October by the Hamas, when they came into Eretz Yisrael, and the havoc that they caused, the murder, the immorality, acting worse than beasts. Everybody knows about it, even though there are many that try to forget about it. And when you take a look at the Jewish people, the Jewish soldiers in the Israeli army, it's impressive and amazing how they acted with moral restraint. The Jewish people could say proudly, Ru'u ma bein b'ni u'bein chami. Look at the difference between Reuven and Esau. Look at the difference between the Jewish soldiers and the animals who were accompanied by UN officials. When they entered Jewish settlements, and the nations of the world, and unfortunately many Jews and many candidates for office, and many Jews unfortunately are becoming impressed with what these candidates for office say. They make it sound like the Hamas, the people from Gaza, and we know today, and every day we found out there were more and more people from Gaza, not members of the Hamas army, that joined them when they attacked the Jewish people. So they were bad one day. One day. But what's ongoing in Gaza, how the Jews defending themselves, that they have no right to do. And then, who do they support? People who say that October 7th never even happened. We have pictures about what happened. And it wasn't the Jews that took the pictures. It was the people who came in themselves that took the pictures. But they know they can lie, and the world will accept their lies. The world will say that was just one day. But what happened in the intervening 10 months, that's terrible. And that hides it. But even more terrible is the actions of the Jews who accept this nonsense. They say that with the self-defense of the Jews is terrible. And you have some Jews that on one hand say they are the protectors of Judaism, the protectors of the Jewish people. And in truth, they give support. They join in support of those politicians that are supporting the contemporary Nazis. Now, we all know, unfortunately, of what happened, that some of the hostages were killed, were murdered with a bullet straight to their head or their heads. And of course, you have certain news agencies that try to play it down. And we're finding out about the conditions that the hostages were under, violation of all morality. And so-called international law. And where is the outcry? Where is the outcry about the torture that took place? Not just on that one day, but day after day after day after day. Over 300 days. Where are all these committees that speak of human rights, that feel that the Arabs have a human right to persecute the Jews, and the Jews have no right to defend themselves? Or they'll say, you have a right to defend yourselves, but when they're among civilians, you can't do anything. And of course, they're always among civilians. By the way, many of those civilians are those that accompanied them. Many of those civilians were the ones that cheered them. Many of those civilians were the ones that attended the parades and were honking with the horns of their cars in honor of their heroes. They were almost all enablers. And of course, and at the same time, leaders of college campuses have no trouble enabling those who speak about the glorious actions of October 7th, who on interviews on TV said they want more October 7th. And there was nothing wrong with October 7th. And the whole world heard it. And they don't feel that it's problematic. They don't feel that it's problematic when Jewish students are attacked. So, because the perception of morality is of such nature, when there's war, everything is allowed, so long as it's done by the other side, so long as it's done by those who attack the Jews. But the Jews are not allowed to defend themselves. But when we look at the differences that took place, we could take great pride in the way the Jewish soldiers acted And I'm not talking just about those who are religious, but even those that came from non-religious homes. We don't hear. There was one false accusation, but we don't hear anything similar to what happened October 7th. And so the Kohen, because of that, in a sense, there was a special emphasis, I think, that v'haya machanecha kodesh. In other words, our religious commitment, our religious observance, our focus on closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't limited to the Beis HaMikdash. We take the Kohen Mashuach Milchama and we bring him to the battlefield. Kohanim were always associated with the Beis HaMikdash. And the Beis HaMikdash was the place where you sense the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where you sense the presence of God. And it was important that we went to battle, that we sense the presence of God also. And in the early days of the war, there used to be beautiful films. I think I mentioned it. How you saw Israeli Jewish soldiers in a circle being Makabel Shabbos, singing Lil Chadodi. Apparently, even some of the non-religious soldiers, those who didn't come from religious backgrounds, they understood on some level the concept of Ahaya Machnecha Kodesh. And I think that was part of the reason why it was necessary for the Kohen, the spiritual figure, the Shevet that was identified with the Beis HaMikdash, to come to the battlefield. And the Torah tells us that at the battlefield, or at the border, wherever it was, the Kohen, and that was followed by one of the officers. The Kohen, after he gave his speech regarding giving support, moral support to the Jewish soldiers and encouraging them and to tell them about God's presence and how God will give them salvation. The Kohen said, and then the shoter, the officer, would repeat it. And he would mention the exemptions. Mi'ish asher bana bayis. Who is the person that built a house below Chanocho, and he didn't initiate living in it? And so he should go back. Who is the person that planted a vineyard? Who is the person that just got married, initiated the process of getting married? And he should go back. And there is a machlokus. there seems to be two opinions as to why these people were exempt. Some say because it will have a negative. If somebody who just built a house it's likely to cause a form of depression. And he's killed, they didn't even have a chance. A person who's just initiated the ceremony of getting married and did not complete the ceremony. In the old days, we had Dushin and the Suin. The ceremony was in two parts, and it was separated by a period of time. Today, we do it all together. And then, and if these things should happen, and it will be a source of depression. But the others explain it, and it seems that most of the Mefarshim explain it, that the necessity for this halacha, for these exemptions, was based on the fact that a person who just built a house, just initiated the marriage ceremony, that just planted his vineyard, he's going to be mentally focused on the fact that he did not complete it. And that will interfere with his ability to fight in the war. And not only, very often, if we're overtaken by these type of thoughts that will not allow us to do the job that has to be done. So it not only affects us, but it affects others as well, the other soldiers as well. So because of this, the Torah said, if you're in a situation that your mental focus won't be on the battle, won't be on the war, but it'll be focusing on other things, and the possibility that you won't be able to accomplish those other things. So, Yelech v'yashiv lebeisa, let him return, because he will interfere with the war effort. But there is a machlokas rishonim. Many say, and this is all true in a Milchemes mitzvah, in a war of mitzvah, but a war that's not a war of mitzvah. Now, there are two types of wars. I've mentioned it many times, especially recently. There's a war of mitzvah and there's a voluntary war. The war of mitzvah, according to Rambam, are of three types. There is the Milchemes Amalek, the war against Amalek. Today, we don't know of any nation that is Amalek, so it's not applicable anymore. There is the war against the Shiva Amimim, the war against the 7 nations. And that too, as a matter of fact, the Rambam says, they cease to exist as a nation. That mitzvah of waging war against the 7 nations is no longer applicable. But then, and this unfortunately, we've had so many times, especially recently, Milchemes Yisrael miyad sor sheba alehem, the war of the Jewish people from an enemy who attacked them. And that's a Milchemes mitzvah. And the Gemara says, by Milchemes Mitzvah Hakol Yotzin, by a war of mitzvah, everybody goes out. The exemptions that are mentioned in this week's Sedra about building a house, planting a vineyard, they don't apply. Getting married, they don't apply. Milchemes Rishus is where we go to war for extraneous reasons, other reasons. Even according to the way we paskin, there is a potential enemy, but who's not yet planned an attack on us. But that and there are all kinds of prerequisites in order to go to war. Milchemes Rishus, a voluntary war. You need the consent of a king, which we don't have today. You need the consent of Beis Din HaGadol, the High Court of Israel, which we don't have today. And you need the consent of the Urim V'Tumim, of the breastplate that the Kohen Gadol wore, that he received heavenly messages through letters on the different stones in the breastplate that would light up. And of course, we don't have that today. So a Milchemes Rishus, a voluntary war, is not applicable today. Even Milchemes Mitzvah, the war of mitzvah, the only type of Milchemes Mitzvah that applies today is Milchemes Yisrael Miyatzor Shabo Aleim, the war of the Jewish people against an enemy who attacked them. And there, I don't think, even though there is an expression in one text of the Sefer Mitzvahs that might be interpreted to the contrary, but I don't think that's the way it should be understood, that the mitzvah of waging war against an enemy that attacks you, you don't need, it's clear. You don't need a king. You don't need a Beis Din HaGadol. And I personally think that according to all texts of the Rambam, you don't need the consent of the Urim V'Tumim. And the best proof for it is during the Second Commonwealth, in the Battle of Hanukkah, the Battle of the Chashmonayim. At that time, the Urim V'Tumim did not answer. They could not get during the Second Commonwealth the consent of the Urim V'Tumim. The Rambam says, "Ein Meshivin." Still, the Jewish people, because of a necessity of defending themselves, went to war. So we see that the war of Yisrael Miyatzor Shabo Aleim, the war of the Jewish people against an enemy attacks them, has no prerequisites other than self-defense. And if there was ever a war of self-defense, this was the war of self-defense. So the Rambam, most of the Rishonim say that they did not appoint a Kohen Mashuach Milchama. They did not appoint the Kohen who went to war against who went with them to war in a Milchemes Mitzvah. There was no need, because part of the task of the Kohen was to announce the exemptions. And there is no exemptions by a Milchemes Mitzvah. The Rambam, however, says that a Kohen Mashuach Milchama was appointed by Milchemes Mitzvah. This is the Rambam in the Yad HaChazaka. The Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs seems to have a different opinion, although the contradiction could be answered. So the Rambam in Yad HaChazaka says that even by a Mechemes mitzvah, even by a war of mitzvah, the Kohen Mashuach Milchama, the special Kohen, was there. And the question is, and the Rabbi asks against the Rambam, if the function of the Kohen Mashuach Milchama was to announce the exemptions, but by Milchemes mitzvah, by war of mitzvah, Hakol Yotzin, everybody goes out. Afilu chasan mechupasa v'kala mechedra, even in the chasan and the kala, in the midst of their wedding, if it becomes necessary, they go out to war. A war of mitzvah, the war of self-defense that we have today waging in Israel is certainly a war of mitzvah. So Hakol Yotzin, everybody goes out to participate in that war. So what is the purpose of having the Mashuach Milchama? So the Ravid, in explaining the Rambam, it seems, my uncle said that it seems from the words of the Ravid that he personally felt under no circumstances do we appoint the Mashuach Milchama by a Milchemes mitzvah. But he says the Rambam probably felt that we need a Kohen Mashuach Milchama not to announce exemptions, because there were no exemptions. I call Yotzin. Everybody goes to war. But to say the words of encouragement, Al Yerach Lebavchem, don't be scared. That God is with you. Al Tiro, don't be scared. And so these words of encouragement had to be said even by a Milchemes mitzvah, according to the Rambam. However, the simple reading of the Rambam seems to imply that there was no difference between a Milchemes mitzvah and a Milchemes rishus. That what the Kohen Mashuach Milchama did by a voluntary war, he did by a war of mitzvah also. On the other hand, the Rambam says, Milchemes mitzvah hakol yotzin. By a war of mitzvah, everybody goes out. And what I heard from my father was, to answer that question, that there are circumstances. It depends on the circumstances. And it's up to the king. The king decides. If he wants, he can draft everybody by a Milchemes mitzvah, by a war of mitzvah. But if it's not a Milchemes mitzvah, he can't force those who have these exemptions from going out. Now, but I'm troubled by something else. And this is, and I think it's very important for us to understand this. I'm troubled because one of the reasons given why there are these exemptions by a Milchemes rishus, by a voluntary war. A voluntary war doesn't mean that you volunteered for the war. The king could force you to go out. Voluntary war meant that it was up to the king and the Beis Din Hagadol, the High Court of Israel, to decide whether to wage war. But once it was decided to wage war, the voluntary war became incumbent upon those who didn't have exemptions. So why, according to many, why didn't they go out by Milchemes rishus, by the so-called voluntary war? Because they wouldn't focus on the war. They'll focus on the house they just built and the fact that they might not be able to live in that house. And that will interfere with the war effort. So my question is, so why aren't we scared by a Milchemes mitzvah about those mental interferences that will hinder the war effort? If the reason there are exemptions is because these situations will hinder the war effort, because people will not be able to focus properly on the battle that they're in the midst, and they'll focus on their situation. So why should there be a difference between a Milchemes mitzvah and a Milchemes rishus? If their participation in the war will hinder the war effort. So they should not be able to fight in any of the wars. And at the very least, they should be exempt from fighting in the Milchemes mitzvah also. So how does the halacha say, Hakol Yotzin? Everybody goes out by Milchemes mitzvah. And I was thinking, this is a question that bothered me. I think there's such a concept as ein breira. We have no choice. If a person sees himself in a situation of ein breira, there is no choice. He focuses on that one thing. I have no choice. I have to do this. But if a person thinks there is a choice, and what I'm doing is not necessary, so then he begins to wonder, I would be better off not doing this. And the truth of the matter is, this concept applies to halacha. I once heard from my uncle years ago. I was a young boy, and my uncle used to give a Tuesday night share in the Maria congregation, West 80th Street, Broadway, in New York, and the Upper West Side. And at that time, so my uncle was discussing HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling Moshe Rabbeinu to warn the Jewish people not to go up on Har Sinai during the process of Matan Torah. And at one point, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Lo yuchal ha'am lalos, the people will not be able to go up the mountain. My uncle said, Moshe Rabbeinu should have said, they are not allowed, they know they're not allowed to go up the mountain. Why do you mean lo yuchal ha'am lalos? But there is a perspective here to Torah and mitzvahs. In regard to Yisura and prohibitions, the question is are we to view Yisura and prohibitions? Don't do it. You shouldn't do it. It's bad to do it. Or are we to view Yisurim, I can't do it. It can't be done. It can't be done. It's impossible. When it comes to Torah and mitzvahs, it's not enough. I can't do it. Not enough. I shouldn't do it. Don't do it. if it's don't do it, I can't do it. Because once I can do it, there will be situations in which I will do it. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. Lo yuchal ha'am la'alos. It's not just that it's prohibited for them to go up, that they know it's prohibited, that it was already prohibited. Lo yuchal ha'am la'alos. If they're prohibited from doing it, and we're standing at Matan Torah, they won't be able to do it. I'll tell us, if a person sins a number of times, nasa lo kaheter. To sin the first time, the second time, it might be difficult, but each time makes it much easier. In a sense, that's one of the things. We talk about freedom of will. But the more I sin, the more difficult it becomes for me to stop myself from sinning. There is a taboo on sinning initially. But when I sin and nothing happened, somehow we have the situation of the Eitz Hadas.
Could you just please repeat your father's question and answer in the Rambam?
My father's question, which question? What question? My father, yeah. The question is, the Rambam says, the Milchemes mitzvah, Milchemes mitzvah, you appoint a Kohen Mashuach Milchama, not just for a Milchemes Rishus, but even for a Milchemes mitzvah. So the Ravid's question is, the purpose of the Mashuach Milchama was to announce the people who were exempt from going to war. And by Milchemes mitzvah, no one is exempt. Hakol Yotzin, everybody goes out. So why did they appoint the Mashuach Milchama? So my father said, the reason they appointed a Mashuach Milchama was it depended. There were situations where the king would decide by Milchemes mitzvah whether everybody had to go out or not. So in a situation where the king said not everybody has to go out, they had a Mashuach Milchama. But if the king said everybody has to go out by a Milchemes mitzvah, then they didn't have a Mashuach Milchama. Yeah, you got it?
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
okay.
now you're talking, sorry. So the taboo, if you sin initially,
this taboo is the taboo.
The next time you sin, it's easier.
Yeah, it becomes easier and easier. Why? Because when it comes to sinning, you can't have an attitude. And it's probably, this is probably more difficult for Jews in America. You know, the story is told that the Chavetz Chaim, the first time he saw somebody being Mechal Shabbos, he fainted. He just couldn't believe it. It was impossible. The second time he didn't faint anymore. Well, that was about somebody else, of course. He didn't faint anymore. We have to have an attitude when it comes to mitzvos. I can't do it. I can't do it. And of course,
for Averos,
yeah, I'm talking for Averos. For the sins, I can't do it. And so the same, we said the same thing by the Eitz Hadas. My father would mention the Rambam asked the question, but Eitz Hadas, he says a certain philosopher asked him a question. He says it seems that Adam and Chava, when they ate from the Eitz Hadas, they were rewarded from it because they became Yodeya Tov V'Ra, the Torah says. They became knowledgeable in good and bad. And beforehand, They weren't knowledgeable in good and bad. So the Rambam, the Ram says, beforehand they were knowledgeable in emes v'sheker, true and false. But later on, they lost that perception of true and false, and it was good and bad. What does that mean? What is emes v'sheker? Emes v'sheker we apply not when we talk about morality. We apply emes v'sheker when we talk about mathematics, about science. My father would always give the example, a triangle has 180 degrees. That's not good, that's not bad, it's true. And if you say a triangle has 150 degrees, it's not bad, it's false. When you speak about gravity, the fact that there is gravity, that if you throw a stone, it goes down. So that's true. It's not good. If you say when you throw a stone, it goes up without going down, that's false. It's not bad. It's false. He says, before, the way my father explained it, before man sinned, before man's attitude regard to sin was not good and bad morality. Morality and mathematics and science was all one, in the sense that I can't sin because I can't sin. It is because it is. But after the sin of the Eitz Hadas, there was a wedge created between moral truths and scientific and mathematical truths. Scientific and mathematical truths, that was emes v'sheker, true and false. Morality, the attitude of morality was, it's a bad thing to do. Once it became, to act immoral. Once it's a bad thing to do, I can always think of reasons that in that particular situation it should be good. And this is the idea. The idea is emes v'sheker. It's like a triangle have 180 degrees. I'm not allowed to do it. I can't do it. It is because it is. It can't be done. At least it can't be done by me. There are many things that I can't do. And something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, don't do, it should be in my mind as impossible to do. Impossible to do. And this, I think, is what the facts are. When someone sees something as being absolutely necessary, the attitude is, it has to be done, and if it's a prohibition, it's impossible to be done. But if we say it's not something that had to happen, but it could have, it didn't have to be done, then I view it not from the perspective I have to do it, that it must be done. It can only be done. So I think the same thing is true by Milchemas Rishus. It's true. Milchemas Rishus, once the war is declared, everybody has to participate in the war. But a person going to war, why did he have to do this war? We really didn't need this war, and I have so many things to take care of. So it will affect my attitude towards the war, because it was not, in my mind, there are things that are much more necessary. But when we come to Milchemes Mitzvah, when there's a special command from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go to war, and when the Jewish people were on a certain level of lo yuchal ha'am la'alos, especially knowing that the Aron was there, in a sense, for Haya Machanecha Kodesh, and it was a Milchemes Mitzvah, that I'm going to war because of a directive. It originates with the directive of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't originate with the directive of the Melech, of the king. So the attitude of the Jews in times when people had the proper attitude is if I have no choice, then the fact that I just planted a new vineyard, the fact that I just built a new house becomes irrelevant. There's no choice. What can I do? There's nothing that can be done about it. I have to go to war. I have to be victorious for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for God's sake. But, of course, halachically, he would have to go to war, even in Milchemes Rishus. But that's the way the mind works. The king didn't have to declare a war. And if the king didn't declare a war, I wouldn't have to go. And I have these important things to take care of. So he won't focus on the war. But if it's something that is absolutely necessary, then those things disappear from the mind in a generation where you have an attitude of lo yuchalam lalos, the people won't be able to go up. There is no other choice. And I think this is important what we know. There are terrible tragedies that take place. And I understand the relatives of the hostages. I understand. You can't find fault with them. And no one who is not in their place can judge them. But we have to know. You have to understand to the relatives of the hostages, to the parents, the lives of their children are most important to them. It's important to everybody, but to them it's more important than their own lives. And very often it's more important than the lives of anybody else. And that's probably the natural tendency of parents. But anybody with common sense understands that we're not fighting just about today. That is what the world wants us. That was October 7th, but we had 10 months already. No. If we don't get rid of Hamas, or to whatever degree we don't get rid of Hamas, there will be like they're screaming in the college campuses. There will be more October 7th. There is no choice. Ain't brera. There is no choice. And when we go around and we say yesh brera, there is a choice. Like some Jews made the mistake in Israel years ago, screaming yesh brera. That's when we have October 7th. If you think about one day, you get peace for one day. But we want to prevent it from happening again. Everybody saw it. Take an example from America, Afghanistan. They ran out, and on that day, 13 people were killed. They didn't even have one day. And that's the choice we face in Israel today. And it's not that they're keeping it a secret. They say openly they're going to do it. They're not even lying. they'll all scream what Trump is saying, and you have to believe him even though they're misquoting him. But when Hamas is saying it, when the Arabs in the West Bank are saying it, then you don't have to believe how they're going to destroy the Jewish people. It's very interesting. At the end of this week's Sedra, where a dead body was found, and it's not clear who killed the person. And so you bring an egla rufa, a red heifer. It's a whole ceremony. And the elders of the city closest, they make a statement, Yodenu lo shofcho es adam hazeh v'einenu lo ro. We did not cause this person to die. And the